This summer, all new episodes of author interviews from our Book TV lineup. This week, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski on her book Far From Home, an Alaskan senator faces the extreme climate of Washington, D.C. She was first appointed to the Senate in 2002 by her father, Frank Murkowski, who resigned his seat to become governor of Alaska. Her book covers an over 20-year career in Washington. She's often described as a moderate Republican and swing vote. In the book, she gives a candid account of how things get done in D.C. The publisher describes it as an uplifting narrative for anyone seeking reassurance that our political system can still work. Senator Murkowski is interviewed by Libby Casey of The Washington Post.
But let me start where I was before. You are known in Alaska as Lisa, and I brought a visual aid to show everyone. This is one of the old campaign buttons. It's just Lisa, plain old Lisa.
Yeah, I don't remember if that was 2016, but I'll tell you that the logo design, that was actually me and my mother-in-law sitting at our kitchen table. We had soup. We were paying ad people a lot of money to come up with the colors and the style, and that was me and Dorothy. Just saying.
Well, the theme has endured because the signs for the campaign are just Lisa, and that's how people know you. And Alaska is like one big small town in the sense that you can be in the hardware store in Anchorage or in a small village, and people will just come up to you and start talking to you as Lisa.
Yeah.
I'm going to call you Senator Murkowski because I, as a long time,
Lisa, we've known one another for a long time.
As a long-time reporter in Alaska, I am trained to call you Senator Murkowski. We're going to talk tonight about some of the big news stories of the day, but also, of course, what is in your book, Far From Home. To start out with, though, I want to talk about Iran. My colleague Emily Davies at The Washington Post just posted a story moments ago that the White House is choosing to limit the classified intelligence it shares with Congress after leaks to the news media of an early assessment that undermined President Trump's claims. So where does this put you and your colleagues in the Senate? Vice President J.D. Vance this weekend on Meet the Press was saying, just trust President Trump. And he said, I empathize with Americans frustrated after these decades of entanglements, but back then we had dumb presidents. And now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives. What is your role in the Senate?
So we have a very clearly defined role under Article 1, and that is Congress has the power to basically declare war, right? So we don't want to be declaring war unless we have good intelligence, and unless we have the facts that are shared with us freely. So I had not heard that there was going to be a limitation in terms of the intelligence that is shared with us. We were supposed to have had a briefing yesterday, Tuesday, that got moved to tomorrow. So that will be tomorrow afternoon. It's my understanding that we will be briefed by the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, who also wears the hat of the head of National Security Council, as well as the head of the CIA, John Ratcliffe.
And the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Okay, that's a new add too. So I have made very clear that before we have a vote on a war powers resolution, I want to hear in a classified setting the information that was provided that gave the president what he believed to be that imminent threat to the country and to our national security.
President Trump has already, in his few short months in the second term, made a habit of just acting unilaterally with DOJ, which has really affected Alaska in a lot of ways. We're talking everything from like the Forest Service to nonprofits, renaming Denali, going back on something.
We're going to work on that one. We're going to work on that one.
So I mean, you write a lot in your book about like the importance of a balanced government, right? The three branches of government, co-equal, working together, sometimes in opposition, but respected. Like, are you relevant right now?
We have to be relevant. The very foundations of really our operational democracy require this balance. And it is a tension. I mean, there's a tension between the executive and the legislative and the judicial. And it was designed to be that healthy tension. It's not unusual, it's not unprecedented to have the executive, whether it's President Trump or President Biden or whatever president in front, to have them kind of push their authority. That is not unusual. What I am feeling as a member of the legislative branch is that we are not being as faithful to our constitutional role. We can't put all of the blame and say, well, it's all on Trump. It is if we don't it's pushing back, but it's also asserting our own authorities under the Constitution. And so we actually had a hearing today to discuss a rescissions package. As an appropriator, as a member of the legislative branch that, again, defined under Article 1 of the Constitution what our role is there when it comes to the power of the purse and appropriations, we're happy to take your suggestions, but it's upon us to determine what it is that we then do. We have authorized, we have appropriated to it, and we expect the executive to implement.
So rescission meaning taking back funding that was
Basically
already allocated. I know public
clawing it back.
broadcasting is like, I'm getting emails all the time from public broadcasting stations around the country saying this is a desperate, dire moment because of the rescission that's about to happen.
Particularly in a state like Alaska. You know, so many of the communities that you read about in the book, starting off with a place like Newtok, I can pretty much guarantee you, it's that public radio coming out of Bethel that allows them to be not only connected within their village, but connected with other communities, whether you've got a weather system coming in, or whether it's announcing the hunting and fishing regulations.
I want to talk about your relationship with President Trump. You've never voted for him? Mm-mm. You write in your book that in 2016, when choosing between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, you wrote in John Kasich. Mm-hmm. Who did you vote for in 2020 and 2024?
I'm a big fan of Condoleezza Rice.
Is that a double? Did she get a twofer?
It was Kasich, Condi Rice. Oh, Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley this time around.
Your personal interactions with President Trump have actually been quite positive. Mm-hmm. Phone calls? Have you talked to him recently?
I have.
How did that call go?
The call went very well. I've got to figure out how to have relationships with whoever is in the White House, whether I voted for them or not. You got to figure out how you're going to do the work that you need to have done for the state that you care about, right? And so how you develop these relationships, how you make it work, how you get things done. I think this is sometimes the challenge that you have translating some of your actions, your votes. People are like, well, wait a minute, if you didn't vote for him, you didn't support him, why did you just support that nominee? Well, because first of all, he, like him or not, is the president, and he needs to have a cabinet. My role is in that role of advice and consent, whether it's on nominees or whether it's judicial nominees or cabinet. And so I take that seriously, I take it critically, but I'm not going to just not have a relationship for 4 years, because you know what will happen then? Then my state will be compromised. And so how you figure out how you work with people is really what it's all about. And when we can find common ground, and we certainly have common ground with President Trump when it comes to the issue of resources and resource development. And for my state, that's critically important. So where there are areas that I disagree, you've noticed that I am not shy to express the concerns. And so you engage.
What's interesting is, so you don't support him in 2016, especially when the Access Hollywood tape comes out. You find it to be a disqualifying event. Your Republican colleagues, many say the same thing, and then they kind of backtrack. But he wins the election, and you call him, not expecting to get him on the phone. You're going to get like an aide or something, and he picks up the phone, and there you have a chat.
Yeah, it was my first engagement with him. Absolutely, the first engagement. It was I was actually in Hawaii at my mother-in-law's. So it was a 6-hour time difference. So I got up early. I was like, I'm going to talk to the president-elect of the United States. He knows that I didn't vote for him. He knows that I said very publicly that he should actually step down. But I gotta figure out who he is, and I'm gonna weigh in. I wanted to give him a couple names for consideration for the Department of Interior. And he answered the phone, and it was a very pleasant conversation, and I decided, okay, I'm just gonna have to just be direct. And so I said, sir, you probably know that I didn't support you. And he said, mm-hmm. And I said, but here's the way I'm looking at it. I said, you want to do good things for the people in this country, and I want to do good things for the people in the state of Alaska, and I think we can figure this out. And that was kind of how we started that relationship.
We'll talk more about how that relationship evolves, but you and your fellow Republican Senator Dan Sullivan go to an Oval Office meeting, and you write that it was one of the strangest meetings you ever attended, and I have to say, it's pretty strange. It's a pretty strange meeting. You go in with charts and graphs to get his attention. Nice, big, bold stuff. And why was this such a weird meeting?
Well, so it's the first real sit-down with the president. It was probably within the first 90 days. And so to have a sit-down with the President of the United States to talk specifically about Alaska's issues. So it was Senator Sullivan and myself, along with Secretary Zinke, who is the Secretary of Interior, and all of the president's really top advisors. And so it was a very big deal. And so we wanted to talk to him about everything from resource development to some of the challenges that we were facing as a state. Dan had a very keen focus on the military and national security perspective. So we had charts and statistics, and we were ready to just make our case to the President of the United States. And he was, I think, really delighted to have the conversation, because he said he's fascinated by Alaska. His grandfather had spent some time in Skagway in the gold rush days, and so he was
running hotels.
Now he said hotels, so I'm not going to question that. But it was really engaging, because he was captivated in talking about the things that
I mean, he was like a tourist. It was like you talking about all the things that are amazing about Alaska, probably the big cabbages and the moose.
He mentioned that his son was a big hunter, and so we got going down the path of talking about bears and moose and
so if you played that game, if you did that, which you enjoy, you felt like you could in the meeting introduce the issues that you were really passionate about and
we
get
did.
Some face time.
We got to issues. I mean, we got to substantive issues. We were talking about ratification of Law of the Sea Treaty. We were talking
things that have been stalled for a long time, things that really need, like, that you could have gotten his
things
attention
like
with.
King Cove Road, something that we'd been working on for a long time. So we got into a lot of substance, but we had a 90-minute meeting with the President of the United States talking about Alaska stuff, and he was having fun. I was having fun, and then we get to the end of the meeting, and he kind of leans across this big, the Resolute desk, and he says, "You've got nice hair." And I just thought, wow, we've just had this big meeting of Alaska substance, and a lot of the touristy stuff too. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, how do you respond to that? And then he says, because Melania, his wife, was in the Oval Office as well, along with another woman. And he says, Melania, don't you think she's got nice hair? And Melania was on her phone. She looks up and she says, mm-hmm. And she does have nice hair. And then he didn't drop it. He's like, well, Dan, it's not like your hair is not nice, but, it's just like normal. But she's got nice hair. So that was how it ended.
I'm sure your family still jokes about it to this day.
Oh, they do. It's like, the Donald would not like your hair today, Lisa.
The relationship gets a little more complex, though, over time, because you do, as we just heard a few moments ago in that lovely introduction, you do vote against some big priorities of President Trump, including repealing the Affordable Care Act. You get a
And why? Not because I was trying to poke a finger in the eye of President Trump or anybody on his administration, but because we deal with situations in Alaska where lack of access to care. I mean, it is a real challenge for us in a huge state like Alaska with a limited number of providers, and the cost is just so extraordinary. So everything that was being pieced together, it wasn't fitting for Alaska, and there wasn't any way to make it fit. And so I just had to be clear that it just doesn't work. And you want to be helpful. This was a big priority, right? But if it doesn't help your state, then you have to say, I'm sorry.
You recount a story about Congressman Don Young, who was like the dean of the House, a congressman for decades and decades and decades. He died a couple of years ago while still in office. And you worked with him for the entire time of your service up to that point. So President Trump is ticked about this bipartisan infrastructure bill, which has some irony because it was like infrastructure week every week during the Trump administration.
Everybody wanted to do infrastructure.
Yes, and then you guys are actually getting it done. You're in this bipartisan group, you're getting it done. He calls Don Young to yell at him. Now, Don Young loved infrastructure. He calls him and says, you can't pass this bill, don't do it. And then he yells at him, and what does he say about you? Do you feel comfortable sharing that?
All I can do is repeat what Don said. And Don is no longer alive to cover himself. But the president was saying, there's awful things in this bill. To which Don said, no, Mr. President, there's not. If you've read the bill, you would know there's a lot of good things in it. And he said, well, you know that bitch Murkowski wrote it. And Don flipped back, well, that's exactly why I'm going to support it. Now, that's Don Young retelling the story. But yeah, that building that bill was something that, as I look back and go through those moments in my political tenure here where I really felt like we were doing the work that people asked us to do, doing the work of our constituents, and doing it as lawmakers, tasked with hard stuff, but putting everything else aside and working together in a bipartisan basis. I look back on that and say, these are the initiatives that the people in this country are looking for when they're looking to their elected lawmakers. They want us to figure out how we are going to get along and get stuff done, and put aside the partisan bickering and the point scoring, and just say, what can we do? What can we do in transportation infrastructure that's so big for this country? So we're not just going to focus on Amtrak, but we're also going to remember that in a state like Alaska, where you don't have roads in 80% of your communities, you're going to have to figure out how else do you move around. Well, maybe it's by water. So maybe we need to have support for our ferry systems, for our Alaska Marine Highway, and to have these kinds of conversations where we were learning from one another. It was the best. It was the best of legislating.
C-SPAN's Afterwords podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwords podcast.
You write that So after the 2020 election, so late November 2020, you entered this 2-year period of exceptional bipartisan accomplishment. You write, it felt like a fog was lifting. And there's some irony there because we remember, and we'll talk about this, but we remember that time period of Trump contesting the election, the insurrection at the Capitol, so much division in this country. And yet you found a way with a group of senators across the aisle and in your own party to what you think of as being a really exceptional accomplishment.
People needed some glimmer of hope. Think about what we had just gone through. We'd gone through COVID, awful, awful dark time. To your point, we had gone through some really politically awful periods with the impeachment. And so how do you let people know that all is not lost? You've got to demonstrate that you can do something, that you can work cooperatively. And there were a few times where we were in our deliberations, and it's hard stuff. It's hard stuff. And there were times when one member or another would say, I've had enough. We're not getting anywhere. We're not making any headway here. You're being unreasonable. And we all had to be reminded that what we were working on was bigger than just the argument that you and I may be having back and forth about whether or not we increase this number here or decrease this number over there. We needed to prove that we could rise above the politics of the day to give hope to people. And I think we did. I felt that we did. But then we kind of slipped back into our old bad habits, I guess.
I'm going to come back to President Trump, but I promise we won't live in Trump world the entire time of this night. But he did try to get you out of office in your last election. He tried to essentially primary you. He said, I want anyone with a pulse to run against this senator. And indeed, someone did run against you, but something that helped you survive was an open primary and ranked choice voting. And this all ties together to what you were just talking about working across the aisle and sort of finding ways to compromise. So ranked choice, Alaska is like one of the leading states, really the leading state right now on ranked choice voting. And they just chose to keep it in this latest election, which was quite heated. Do you see that as a model for moderates to make their way to rise up to the top instead of having these closed primaries or separated primaries where we're seeing, like in the House, we're seeing really the extremes?
Yeah, I certainly think that opening up the primaries makes a real difference. We have seen that very immediately in Alaska. You mentioned the 2022 election. Ranked choice was in place, and we saw after all of that, I would have won without ranked choice, but having an open primary really did make a difference, and we see that. We see that so often where you have an individual that is having to run to the right or run to the left during a primary, and then when the general comes, it's like, okay, got to recalibrate to the middle. And you have voters kind of looking and saying, well, wait a minute. It seemed like back in the spring, you were in a different place on this, and now your position has changed. Which one was the real you? And so I think if there's one thing that I think voters want, is authenticity with their elected officials. Show me who you really are, or as close as you can. And so I think that between an open primary system and ranked choice, what you get are individuals who probably will be more comfortable in that middle area, less pressure to be in the far extremes because you're coming from a state and a place where it's just the few that participate in those primaries that are basically making the determination of who wins these offices. But I also liked it as a candidate because it says from day one, you are running as who you are. You're not kind of trying to cater to one group or one side or another. It's just kind of straight across. I think it's also the ranked choice part of it is also good from a candidate's perspective, because if I want people I want them to vote for me, and we talk about this in the book, I'm gonna encourage that. But if, for instance, you say, Lisa, I like what you've done, but I'm here to tell you, I'm a Democrat from day one. My grandfather would roll over in his grave if he knew that I was voting for a Republican. I'd say to you, Libby, I get it. Go ahead and vote for the Democrat as your number one, but give me your number two. And that in and of itself is something that says to me, okay, I better not trash talk the Democrat too much, because if I do, I'm not going to get her second place votes. And so there's a little bit of a strategy, I think, that goes on with it. And I will say, there have been these articles written and the debates had about, well, ranked choice voting is just designed by the Democrats to get all the conservatives out. Look at the Alaska outcome in 2022. You returned a moderate Republican along with a moderate Democrat in Mary Peltola, and a very conservative Republican governor. So it was what it said to me is that Alaskans are going to vote for who they want to vote for.
And Peltola did lose re-election this most recent time, but part of what seemed to help her is that she was her authentic self. Yeah. And as the Republicans, including Sarah Palin, were tearing each other apart, she was just there kind of with her message and not doing that slinging of the arrows that you talk about as sort of, if you destroy your opponent, you can also ultimately destroy yourself, because so much bitterness will mean people won't rank you as
And I
second.
think, again, not that I'm going to assume that I know what all the voters want, but I talk to people that are so tired. They tune out when the campaigns come because they're so weary of the bickering and the antagonism and the attacks. Just tell me what your positions are. Tell me what your vision is. Talk to me about what you got, instead of, again, trash talking your opponent.
You've been doing national media.
I know.
For this book. Senator Murkowski is notorious for sticking to the Alaska press, talking to the people back home, and not doing as much national media. And so the national media has been thrilled to talk to you in the last couple of weeks. And there are a couple descriptions that keep emerging about you. Your independence, moderate is a word used a lot. Also lonely is a word that comes up. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I want to stay in this idea of independence and dig into that, because you write in your book about the 2010 election, which went down in history because you won a write-in vote. This hadn't been done since the 50s when Strom Thurmond did it, because a candidate had died, so people wrote his name in. But you also write that leading up to that race, where you lost a primary to a Tea Party conservative, it's like the harbinger of what is to come. It sounds like you felt like you were drifting away from your authenticity a little bit leading into that race. I mean, I remember talking to you in the halls, and you were very much of the Republican Party line, towing the line. How did you find yourself again in that moment?
Well, I think it was not in that moment that I, quote, found myself. It was really when I was defeated, as you've noted, by a Tea Party opponent who presented himself at a time when we were seeing the Tea Party movement really just start to gain a toehold. For the political junkies that are here, the first casualty in the Senate was my friend Bob Bennett, a great gentleman. Had been in the Senate for a long while. I thought he was pretty conservative, but he was not conservative enough for those in the Tea Party movement there in Utah, and he was defeated in his primary. And he gave me a warning. He said, "Lisa, they're coming for you next." And I said, "No, Bob, you don't know Alaska. We're fine. We're fine." We were not fine, and it was a combination, I think, of the movement taking hold, really kind of catching fire in a place like Alaska, but also, I do hold myself accountable for some of that defeat. It was 10 days before the election that my friend and mentor, Ted Stevens, who'd been in the Senate for 40 years, he went down in a plane crash in Alaska, along with 6 others. I lost 6 friends in that crash. The state went into a period of literal mourning, and I went dark with my campaign, as I rightly should. But it was a hard time personally, because there was so much that you needed to do, but out of respect for this extraordinary leader and all those who perished in that crash, the right thing to do was what we did. And there were consequences to that. And that resulted in a loss. And so it's one of those where you say, I can't say, the election was stolen. It was not. I lost that primary. And any good incumbent or candidate would say, okay, you lost. You're packing. And I said it. I said I was ready to get my season ski pass at Alyeska, and then strange things started to happen. Alaskans said, we want another opportunity at this. We want an opportunity to participate. And voter turnout had been very low.
It was like summer in Alaska.
It was, it's the third
August,
week in August.
Mm-hmm.
The fish are still in the rivers.
People have better things to do.
Kids are starting school,
yeah,
and nobody's really paying attention to the election. But we also had a closed primary at the time, and so many people said, I couldn't participate, or what was worse was those who said, I didn't think you needed my help. You had money in the bank, you had good poll numbers, and you'd been there for a term and a half. We didn't think that there was any jeopardy here. That's not good. Mm-hmm. So, but Alaskans just didn't let me drop it, and I had to listen.
So Sarah Palin comes from Alaska. She's part of this populist Tea Party movement. Joe Miller is part of this populist Tea Party movement. You've been warned by Senator Bennett, and then you pick up the phone and you warn another Republican, a guy running in Delaware,
Mike Castle,
who was running there against a woman named Christine O'Donnell. Y'all may remember her. She beat him, and she ended up losing in the general. She had to do that commercial that said, "I am not a witch."
Yeah.
Never a good commercial to have to run.
Yeah.
But it was really like the first stirrings of this populism. Mm-hmm. How do you see populism factoring in now that Donald Trump has won a second term, that you are seeing this real populist movement in Alaska, other places as well? How do you square that?
Well, I think we see that translated in really the MAGA movement that we see in place today. So to your observation, I think it all began back there in 2010. Mm-hmm.
So I brought another visual aid. Murkowski, slightly challenging name to get people to spell on a ballot because they had to fill in the oval, they had to write the name. So one of the things the campaign did was made these wristbands, like the Lance Armstrong bands, where people, because you couldn't bring in like paraphernalia into
no
the voting
buttons,
booth,
you
no
couldn't
buttons.
bring buttons in. Yeah.
So these were the wristbands that the campaign used. And you now have a gold bangle that corresponds to that,
Yeah,
right? That's
well,
like the...
So mine still says Lisa Murkowski. Fill it in, write it in, because that was the jingle. But the real story behind these bracelets, Vern and I were sitting at an airplane hangar at the memorial service for the pilot that had perished in the plane that Senator Stevens and his group went down on. And at that service, they had passed out rubber bracelets that had his name in memory of. And Vern was just sitting there kind of twiddling it, and because we'd been talking about how are we gonna teach people to spell Murkowski, 9 letters. Not that 9 is hard, but is it with a Y at the end or an I? Is it an E, M-E-R, M-U? Now I'm confusing all of you. But I mean, this was something that we were really challenged with. And Vern looks at that and he's like, how about if we put your name on it? And how about, and then we had to teach people that not only did you have to spell the name right, but you had to fill in the bubble next to the line that said write in, because if you wrote my name in perfectly, but you didn't fill in the oval, it didn't count. So this was really an education process. So Vern, who is my apolitical political advisor, was the one that came up with these bands. So between my mother-in-law and I designing the button and the wristbands, why did we need an ad team? But don't tell my ad team that. They did a great job.
Vern gave you that bracelet after you won re-election?
Yeah, Vern turned my plastic one into gold, and I've worn it every. I don't take it off since 2010. It's my reminder. It's my reminder of how I was returned to this place, and to the task in front of me, but also kind of who returned me. I'm still a Republican. I was a Republican in that write-in, but I was not the Republican candidate. The Republican candidate had beat me, Joe Miller. And so I just ran as Lisa. And so the person who was filling in that bubble, writing in that name, very affirmative act of voting. There was no lesser of two evils. You had to really want me to be returned in order to do that. And so the host of different Alaskans that engaged in this very affirmative act, they were, yes, Republicans, but they were Democrats, they were independents, they were nonpartisan, they were, none of your damn business party. They were Alaskans that returned me. And so I've been challenged on this. You don't necessarily toe the party line. You're not, quote, always a good Republican. But I have said my obligation, my responsibility is not to my party. It is to the people that I serve. And it's my North Star. It's what guides me. And so I have to follow that. And I gladly follow that. And I think that has given me, back in 2010, given me that real purpose and mission in never forgetting who I serve and what they have asked me to do.
How rare is that feeling of independence, do you think, in the Senate right now?
It's hard for me to speak for others or to be critical or to say my way is the best way. I just have to approach it the way I feel comfortable. And sometimes, believe me, it is not comfortable. I've got refrigerator magnets that remind me that life begins at the edge of your comfort zone, and I'm always like right on the edge there. But it's the responsibility that I have. It's the trust that has been placed on me, and I take it very, very personally. I work hard. The easiest thing to do in this job, I can tell you, the easiest thing to do would just be to take your party talking points and just follow the line. Then you don't have to agonize over decisions. You don't have to bear the weight of I'm going to listen to all sides. I'm going to entertain the views from all groups. It's a hard job, but it's an important one.
I really felt for your staff at moments in this book because you would have these like nights of like, I will or I won't, I'll vote this way, I won't vote this way. Surprise, guys, I've thought about it some more. Staff, kudos to you guys.
C-SPAN's Afterwords podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwords podcast.
There's something liberating in that independence, but there's also something that makes you at the center of the storm, which we witnessed earlier tonight. You are someone that people think that can be persuaded, swayed, convinced. You could go towards the Democrats, you could stay with the Republicans. What is that like, and how do people convince Lisa Murkowski that they should be listened to?
Well, you ask, what does it feel like? Your kids have one of those Gumby dolls where you just kind of pull them. I joke about that. It's not comfortable to be in hard conversations, but this is not designed to be easy. I mean, nobody promises that when you become a United States senator, that somehow or other, the higher up the elected process you go, things get easy. It absolutely is not. And so, how do you influence me? Facts. Facts really help. Sticking with things like the rule of law matters to me. Some constitutional provisions matters to me. So,
one decision that you agonized was whether or not to vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to be a Supreme Court justice. And, I was covering this live at the Washington Post, and as soon as he started yelling, I actually turned to a colleague and said, I think they just lost Lisa Murkowski. And then you agonized over this decision for a long time, but you could have just called me and I probably could have told you how you were going to vote. Because it was
thank you, Libby.
You're welcome. But there was a temperament issue there. There was a temperament issue there, and I know you well enough to know what you think. I mean, you're a lawyer, a trained lawyer, you went to law school before entering politics. You had a whole life before you entered politics. You also were probing, of course, quite thoughtfully and carefully what it meant to have Christine Blasey Ford come forward and talk about her allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. Your office was inundated with calls. You were crushed by throngs of people in the halls of Congress. You were meeting with groups upon groups of women who were telling you their own stories of surviving sexual assault. You even talk about your own personal experiences in the book. So what gave you the courage to go out on that limb and be the only Republican to say, I don't feel comfortable with this nominee at this moment?
Well, and again, it occupies a full chapter because it was not an easy decision. Justice Kavanaugh clearly had the legal background. There's kind of a list of things that you go through when you're considering a judicial nominee, and when you're considering a nominee to the highest court in the land, you have to take this role of advice and consent very, very carefully, right? And so I did agonize over it because I saw, just as you have shared here, there was an issue with judicial temperament. People need to know when you're going before a court that the judge is going to be able to be not only free from bias, but really keep their own emotion and personal views certainly below the bench, right? That was one aspect of it. But as I share in the book, I wanted to make sure that Justice Kavanaugh also had an awareness that what the country was going through as a consequence of these hearings, watching Christine Blasey Ford give her testimony, and then seeing this movement. I mean, it was the Me Too movement, where you had women that were stepping forward with personal stories of their own that perhaps they had not shared previously because they felt they would not be heard, or they had shared it and it went nowhere. And so there was this kind of a confluence where it was not just about the qualifications of a nominee, but it was what had been evoked among so many women in this country, all coming to the surface at the same time. And so I asked for a one-on-one meeting with Justice Kavanaugh and had a very direct conversation, which to this day I deeply appreciate. But I came to the conclusion that he was not aware of what so many were going through, and you can't say, well, you are a man who has not have lived experiences, but to have a level of awareness as to what the country was experiencing was what I was trying to evoke from him. It is to this day one of the decisions that I have made that has brought about as much introspection, reflection, truly in terms of due diligence and trying to make the right decisions for the right reason. That was one of the most challenging ones in my career.
You were like the 32nd woman elected to the Senate in like almost
in
2000 in the history of America.
It's crazy.
And I want to talk about loneliness now, because in the early days of the Senate, you had a group of women who would get together. It was like the Murkowski rules, Barbara Murkowski.
Yeah.
It was like you couldn't, no staff, no notes, you couldn't leak anything. It was just women from both parties getting together. She was a senator from Maryland, Democrat.
Yeah, the dean of the women in the Senate, Barbara Murkowski.
You've had other strong relationships in the Senate, people you've worked with. Alaskans cringed when they read about Mitt Romney, when McKay Hopkins wrote the book about Mitt Romney having like a freezer full of salmon fillets from you, like precious Alaskan salmon, and he was like didn't like it and was putting it on buns with ketchup.
He said he liked it. He just liked it with ketchup, which is who puts ketchup on their Alaska salmon?
Must be a Utah thing.
Yeah.
Who do you hang out with now? Where a lot of the people who you have found relationships with in sort of the moderate wings of both parties, the Joe Manchins, the Mitt Romneys are gone.
I wish that I could say, well, I hang out with so and so, but in fairness, we just don't hang out. Maybe it's because we're getting older, but there's just so much that we've got to do. But one of the things
are you finding people to do things with? To accomplish things right now?
Yes. We don't have our gang of 10, our gang of 8 when we were working on the infrastructure bill, but we are working on some initiatives, and those are good. Those are important. But one of the things that you speak about was the Women's Senators Dinner. That was really, there was such value in that, because what it was the women coming together, the Republicans and the Democrats, and sometimes there would be 6 of us, sometimes there would be a dozen of us, but we'd usually have a dinner. Somebody would host. Sometimes it would be in your home. Sometimes it would be over in the Senate. Sometimes it would be a restaurant. And we would just talk as women with interesting jobs, but we didn't have to talk about our jobs. Sometimes we talked about how the place would run if we were running the place. Those are always fun conversations. But we haven't been doing enough of those as we should. And I think they're valuable because you do form friendships where we have that commonality of we all have a hard job, we all have awful schedules, we all ask our families to just take on so much of the burden of unknowing, not knowing when we're going to have recess, when we're going to be coming home for dinner, and it's just hard. And I think most would acknowledge that there is kind of that loneliness because you don't have the time for that socialization. And so for me, it really is, it's my family. My family is what gives me the anchor, keeps me humble, and is the best part of everything I'll ever do.
I'm going to transition to some audience questions now. We got these in advance from people who are here in the audience and those who are attending virtually. And this first one is something that I also would love to hear you talk about. Leonie writes, you recently went viral when you said at a conference, "We are all afraid." What did you mean by that? And what do you tell your constituents who are afraid of the direction that the country is moving under the Trump administration? Yeah. And give us the context. You were talking to a group of nonprofits in Alaska, hundreds of them. But these comments really exploded because people latched onto it. People connected with it.
So this was a couple months ago, and I was home in Anchorage, and I was speaking to a group of nonprofits. There were about 500, maybe 550. It was a big group. And it was just at a really stressful time. What was going on, this was, many of the federal employees that were probationary had been told, you're fired, you're out of here, and then they were kind of brought back on because of legal challenges. There was great uncertainty. We'd already seen a significant round of RIFs, reduction in forces, and so that was a challenge. There was a pause on everything that was going on. Now keep in mind, Alaska has more federal employees per capita than just about any state outside of Maryland and Virginia. And it's not because we asked for it, it's because we have 60% of our lands that are federal lands. We have 17% of our population is Alaskan Natives, so you have IHS and BIA. You have more national parks, more acres of Forest Service land. And so more veterans, we've got all of our military installations. So we see a lot of federal employees, but we also see a lot of federal programs. And so when everything is in limbo, you can't get information about whether or not the grant that you have to help you with your women's shelter is going to come through so that you can make payroll for the next month, and you're not sure whether you can even take in any more women to the shelter, and you don't know where to go, you go to your senator. And there was so much anxiety with everything that was happening in the state. It was palpable. I'd walk through the airport and people are like, "Can you help me with? We've got a small hydro project down in Southeast, and we've been fighting for years to get it. We have the money, and now we can't get anyone to return a phone call." It was a time for us in our office where there was nobody that was not literally working casework around the clock trying to get answers. And everyone was afraid. Is this going to be the end of what I'm working on? What's happening next? Am I going to be able to keep my job? And that's all I kept hearing. And I didn't have any answers because we were trying to get answers as well from the administration. Everybody was kind of drinking out of a fire hose. And sometimes when there is great anxiety, the most helpful thing that you can do is just listen and let people know that I am listening to you and I'm going to try to help. But I also had to acknowledge that I get it. because I'm hearing it from everyone. I am hearing that you are afraid. And so in that room, and if you've watched the video clip that was out there, I think somebody just literally took a handheld, but it was, I paused a few seconds, maybe more, and I said, look, we're all afraid because of the uncertainty. And I didn't say because of the uncertainty, I just said we're all afraid. That was that viral moment. And then I went on further, because in addition to all that kind of uncertainty, what we are also seeing at the same time was we were seeing things coming out of the administration that, in my view, were absolutely unprecedented. When through an executive order, you have literally a blacklisting of law firms because of who they had represented post-January 6th. To me, that, if that isn't retaliation, I don't know what other word to call it. And so I was speaking truth to what we had all seen, and yet it hadn't been expressed outwardly. It certainly hadn't been expressed by a Republican. And so I said what I felt needed to be said, and that was that viral moment.
How do you get, I'm just going to add on a little quick addendum to this, and we'll get back to the audience questions. Why would someone get involved in politics right now? How do you get people? Because I think when people heard that quote of you saying, like, we are all afraid, people heard from it what they were feeling. And some of that was about, like, the fear of retribution, but even the fear of, like, safety, the fear of speaking out, the fear of finding your voice. We just saw this horrific murder of a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband. There was the hit list. I have a former colleague who was on the hit list, who now is in public service and just trying to make a difference in her community. So your message in the book is so much about...
It's supposed to be about hope,
yes,
right?
Yes,
and getting everyone to be involved in your PTA.
Yep.
We are America. We're this open and free society, right? I wish that I could say we lived in a place where we were free from violence and political violence, but that is not our reality. We have gone through some very difficult times as a nation, and probably some that have been more volatile than we are seeing now. But it is how we condemn it and how we roundly condemn it. All of us. It doesn't make any difference what the politics were of somebody who has been made a victim, as to whether or not we express our sympathy and our care. At the end of the day, this is about treating people with respect and dignity. And we as lawmakers need to ensure that we are doing our best to not fan the flames, to not be a participant in these things that ignite and instigate, whether it's violence or just further disruption that is harmful. And so how do you dial it back? I think that really is up to us, and it's not just up to us as lawmakers. I mean, we're seeing this at the local level. We're seeing it translated so that nobody wants to be on the school board because people are getting angry and shouting and wanting to ban your books or whatever it may be. But I reminded somebody as I was talking last week, I said, don't be afraid to involve yourself in these acts of civic responsibility, and do it for the right reason, not because you want to ban a book, but because you care about the school. You care about your community. And if you're doing that, if you're doing it for the right reason, the ones that are going to be loud and bombastic and just want to be there to make the evening news, maybe they will actually get tired of the hard work that actually comes with creating a budget for your little school district or helping to navigate through your local PTA issues. But we can't give up. We can't say it's just too hard. We can't say I don't want to do the extra work, because when we do that, who loses? Our community loses. Our family loses. We need to believe that the differences that we can make are worth some of the inconvenience, some of the sacrifice, but we have to believe in ourselves and what we're working for.
Question from Phoebe.
Okay.
Thanks to your book, we are gathered together to engage with neighbors and strangers. These kinds of connections can be in short supply these days. How can we support the nation's humanities councils as they work to provide opportunities like these with authors and scholars as congressionally appropriated funds are being cut off?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's important because it's important for us to realize the richness that comes when we do come together as communities, when we do come together over humanities and arts and the things that make us richer as human beings.
And does the federal government have a role in that?
I believe so. I believe so. Of course, but then I'm one who believes that education is not just about reading and writing and arithmetic, as important as all that is. I want to make sure that there is an exposure to the arts, to the music, to building out not only children, but it is something that, again, allows us to be better humans and treating one another with greater dignity and respect. And so, is there a role? Yes. This is actually part of the budget that I have as chairman of the Interior Appropriations Committee. Part of that is the NEA and the NEH, National Endowment for Arts and Humanities. And I've been proud of what we have put in place to make sure that people have access to these important programs and provisions. And it's not just that, it's libraries. Yes, we have a role as a government.
Nathan asks, what legislation from your Senate career are you most proud of?
What legislation am I most proud of? I'm sure people want me to say it's been opening up ANWR. The infrastructure bill, obviously, is one that I'm very proud of because of the very collaborative nature of all of that. The Energy Act of 2020 was, I think, transformative in terms of our energy policies that hadn't been updated in a decade plus. There's so much there, but I'll tell you, we did something that's called special interest legislation, and it related to a woman who was in Bethel, Alaska, actually. I don't remember how many years ago. It was some years back. But anyway, it was an immigration issue, and we were able to ensure that she was able to stay in this country with her husband, who was a proud member of the military, and her children. And I think about just the personal satisfaction of knowing that we really helped one family remain together. It was brief headlines in the Bethel newspaper. You'd never know it back here, but those are some of the things that you think about as really worthy and important, because again, it's about how we're treating one another. And if we can throw in a little dignity and respect, it's been a good day.
Final question from Maya, who asks, in these times of immense stress, what brings you joy?
What brings me joy? I have to tell you, I start getting a kind of the ability to breathe and put on a smile the closer I get to home. And I tell you, I feel like I can sense it when I'm on the Alaska Airlines jet, and you leave Seattle, and it's lovely down there, right? But you can tell when you start getting into Alaska, because the mountains have meaning, man. They are big and hard and raw, and everything just kind of opens up, and the water is beautiful, and the clouds are beautiful, and you land, and the air is fresh, and people, you're walking down the sea concourse there, and people are like, "Hey, Lisa," or you have some little old lady come up and give me a huge hug. And I'm thinking, okay, I can't remember her name. And she says, "I've always wanted to meet you." Like, she's greeting me like she's my long-lost friend. And it's just, I feel filled up. I feel like my reservoirs are filled up when I am able to be back home. And then when I'm with family back home, it's just right.
Senator Murkowski, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Libby. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. A note that discussions like this can be found every weekend on C-SPAN 2 Television's Book TV. Next week on this podcast, former President Bill Clinton and James Patterson talk about their recently published third mystery novel, The First Gentleman.